The mountains of Montana at night could almost convince a man he was the last soul alive on Earth. Wind whispered through the endless pines, its moan low and heavy like some ancient voice drifting over the cliffs. Snow clung to every branch, every rock, and when the moonlight broke across the slopes, the world shimmered as though it were sheathed in glass. It was beautiful, yes, but it was the kind of beauty that froze skin and stole sound, a beauty that warned men to tread carefully. On nights like this, Officer Daniel Smith drove his lonely patrol. At 39, with shoulders hunched like a soldier still carrying his gear and hair laced with silver streaks, he looked more carved from the landscape than placed in it. His eyes, storm gray and watchful, scanned the whitewashed road ahead as his SUV crawled along icy bends above a steep ravine. The heater pushed out warmth that fogged the windows, but Daniel's thoughts were colder, haunted memories of war overseas, of sleepless nights guarding strangers' lives. 4 years serving as military police, 12 years patrolling these valleys, and still he couldn't shake the restlessness that came when the world grew too still. That stillness was here tonight, thick enough to raise the hair on his neck. Then his headlights caught something odd. A shadow, half buried near the rocks below. At first he thought deer, then perhaps a body. He killed the engine and stepped out into the snow, boots crunching like bones underfoot. His flashlight beam cut across the ridge, and that's when he saw it. A dog. Not just any dog. A German shepherd, curled tight into itself as though the night itself was an enemy. Its body shook violently, its fur streaked with dirt and blood, a crimson stain slicking its front leg. Its ribs pressed through its pelt, but its eyes glowed alive. Wide, intelligent, afraid, but not of him. Afraid of something else. Daniel knelt low, one hand steady, voice a whisper carrying the softness of a promise. Easy now, boy, easy. I won't hurt you. To his surprise, the dog didn't lunge, didn't even flinch. Those eyes just locked on Daniel's face, studying him as though trying to read his soul. Then the ears slid back, braced for pain that never came. Daniel knew that look all too well. He'd seen it on soldiers abandoned by orders, children left in war zones, men hardened and discarded. The look of betrayal. Slowly, Daniel shrugged off his thick sheriff's coat. The cold stabbed at him instantly, but he ignored it. He wrapped the trembling shepherd in the heavy fabric, then lifted it into his arms. Its weight was solid, 7 years old, maybe more, but full of strength that even exhaustion couldn't erase. Yet every time Daniel's hands touched, the body jerked slightly, too sharply. Not just wounds. Trauma. Laying the animal gently on a folded blanket in the back of his SUV, Daniel whispered, "We'll call you Rex." A quiet name for a battered fighter. The dog blinked slowly once, almost solemn as if acknowledging the new bond. Daniel shut the door and slid into the driver's seat. But the night wasn't finished with him. In the rearview mirror, something caught his eye. A shape among the tree line. A black SUV, dark as ink, headlights off, no license plates. It stood still, a predator waiting. Daniel's pulse hammered. He looked directly, and the vehicle slid back into the forest shadows as though swallowed whole. Vanished. No coincidence, Daniel muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. A bloodied, half-dead shepherd on the roadside wasn't strange enough. But a ghost SUV watching? That meant someone was hunting. Snow swirled heavier now. Rex stirred suddenly, weak lips pulling back into a guttural bark. A warning, raw and instinctive. Daniel stiffened, glancing in the mirror again. Nothing there but a blur of white. Still, the echo of that bark stirred in his chest like smoke after fire. He clicked the radio. Unit 42 here. Officer Smith. Picked up an injured shepherd, possible abuse. Bringing him to rescue cabin for the night. Requesting vet on arrival. He paused, lowering his tone. And might be someone else after this dog. The radio clicked silent. Driving down the mountain, Daniel felt the night press tighter around the SUV, the wind howling louder, the snow falling like ash under the beams of patrol lights. Inside, silence ruled. One man scarred from his past, one dog scarred from his own battles. Neither spoke, but both carried secrets. And neither yet knew. They had just stepped into the beginning of something far bigger. At last, Daniel pulled onto a winding turnoff where a weathered cabin waited, huddled under the trees by the base of the range. His headlights cast long shadows through the flurries, and the tires chewed at the frozen gravel. The cabin had once been part of the county's search and rescue outpost years ago, retired from duty when the department modernized. But Daniel had restored it in his own time, a project that filled gaps in lonely winters. Crude, simple, one room, potbelly stove, wood table, a sparse medical kit, but warm enough for survival. He parked. The cold slapped him the instant he stepped out, sharp as needles against skin. He opened the back door carefully and lifted Rex again. The shepherd whimpered softly, then sagged against him, too exhausted to resist. Daniel brought him inside, laid him by the stove onto another wool blanket, and rubbed at his fur to spark warmth. He fetched warm water, torn bread, jerky softened to chew. At first, Rex refused. His dark eyes kept flicking toward the door, ears twitching at even the looseness of the wind. Trained. Suspicious. This was no stray. Finally, after several minutes of Daniel sitting close without a word, the dog nudged forward slowly, cautiously, and began to eat. Daniel noted the quick side glances, the wary approach. This dog had not been thrown away. He had been through fire. "You're not just some stray," Daniel whispered, stroking his side. "What the hell were you running from?" Only a faint twitch of Rex's ear answered. Daniel exhaled, pulled out his phone, and stared at a contact. Dr. Emily Carter. He hesitated, then dialed. Her voice picked up before 2 rings. "Daniel, everything okay?" She always sounded halfway busy, brisk but calm, warmed by kindness she tried to hide. "Found a German shepherd," Daniel said. "Bad shape. Legs injured, bleeding stopped, but he's trained, military maybe. Scared to hell." Silence, then certainty. "Is he stable?" "Barely. He's fighting, though. I'll be there in 20 minutes. No hesitation. Just commitment, as always." That was Emily. Daniel hung up, turned back to Rex, who had eaten just enough to keep strength, then curled, breathing unevenly in the glow of the stove. Daniel's hand rested on the dog's back again. The fire popped softly, golden sparks flashing across the cabin walls. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, man and dog listened to its growl together. Through the window, faint headlights appeared at last, skating over the frost-smeared glass. Daniel rose, tightened his jacket, and opened the cabin door. Emily Carter entered against the snow. 32 years old, slender and steady, her auburn hair already wet with frost, her scarf dusted in flakes. Her breath came in sharp bursts from the run, her brown eyes sharpened but gentle. Medical bag crossed over her coat, boots crunching in ice. She was slightly out of breath, having jogged from her jeep with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. "Over here," Daniel said, stepping aside. Emily's expression changed as she approached Rex, a shift from focused urgency to deep concern. She knelt slowly beside the dog, letting him sniff her hand before touching him. "He's older," she murmured. "Probably 7 or 8. Good weight, or he was recently. You cleaned the wounds? Quick rinse, no disinfectant yet. Didn't want to stress him." She nodded. "You did good." As she began examining the injury, Daniel stepped back, watching in silence. Emily worked with practiced precision, murmuring reassurances as she cleaned the leg. Rex flinched but didn't growl. Then her brow furrowed. "What is it?" Daniel asked. She pressed her fingers gently along the dog's lower abdomen, her movement slowing. "There's a scar here," she said. "Fresh." This was a surgical incision. Daniel moved closer. "You sure?" "Yes. About 3, maybe 4 days old." And she paused again, pressing carefully. "There's something inside." Hard foreign. Daniel's stomach tightened like a chip. Too big. "It's not natural. I'd need to do a full scan to confirm, but my guess is someone put something inside him." Daniel exhaled sharply. The image of the black SUV in the woods flashed through his mind. "You think someone used him for transport?" Emily looked up. "It's possible." The room fell silent for a long moment. Then Daniel said, "I'm not bringing him to the clinic tonight. It's too exposed." She nodded. "We can monitor him here until morning. I'll stay." Daniel glanced at her. "You don't have to." Emily shrugged off her coat and knelt beside Rex again. "I want to." As she unpacked her tools and medicine, Daniel stepped outside for a moment, the cold air biting hard after the warmth. He stared into the dark trees. Whatever Rex had escaped from, it wasn't finished, and Daniel could feel it in his bones. The storm outside had dulled into a restless whisper, snow hissing softly against the cabin windows. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and antiseptic. The fire burned low, casting a warm but flickering light that danced across the walls. The cabin felt at once safe and suffocating, like a lifeboat adrift on a vast frozen sea. Emily knelt beside Rex in the wool blanket. Her auburn hair, usually neat, had escaped its bun in a frayed halo around her face. Dark circles pulled beneath her eyes, but her movements were steady, professional. They're flexes of someone used to chaos and pain. She spoke softly, more to the dog than to herself, as she pulled on a pair of latex gloves from her duffel. "Easy, boy. Just a look. Nothing more." Daniel sat on the other side of the room, crouched near the stove, his storm-gay eyes never leaving them. He had seen countless wounds in his years of service on men and animals alike, but there was something different about this dog. Something in the way Rex's gaze followed every movement, sharp and intelligent, like he understood the stakes. Emily's fingers brushed along Rex's chest down to his belly. The dog flinched, but didn't fight her touch. She traced the line of fur carefully, pausing when her hand stopped at something that didn't belong, an irregular texture beneath the sable and charcoal coat. She parted the fur. There, beneath the dim light, was a scar, fresh, long, sutured cleanly with thin practiced stitches. Emily froze, her breath catching. She leaned closer, pressing gently along the scar tissue. Her fingertips stiffened when they encountered something hard beneath the skin. Not bone, not natural. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked up at Daniel. "This isn't from an accident," she whispered. "This was surgery. 4, maybe 5 days ago." Daniel stood, boots creaking on the wooden floor. He crossed the room quickly, kneeling beside her. His eyes narrowed, scanning the line of stitches with the suspicion of a man who had seen black market fieldwork in war zones. "You sure?" Emily nodded, pressing again. Rex whimpered softly, shifting under her touch, but his dark eyes fixed on Daniel with something that felt almost like a plea. Not just pain, but a message. "There's something inside him," Emily said firmly. Her brown eyes, usually calm and kind, now burned with urgency. "It's smooth, rigid, foreign. If it ruptures something, it could kill him. And if it's a device of some kind..." She let the rest hang unspoken, the implication heavier than the storm outside. Daniel clenched his jaw, his hand unconsciously brushing the holster at his side. The black SUV flashed in his memory, the way it had lingered, hidden, watching. He knew then this wasn't coincidence. Emily's voice cut through his thoughts. "He needs surgery. Soon. Whatever this is, it doesn't belong in his body. And if we don't act, he may not survive the night." Rex shifted, a low, mournful sound rising from his throat. His paw twitched weakly against the blanket, then stilled. His eyes locked on Daniel's, once again steady, desperate, intelligent. It was as if he understood every word, as if he wanted them to know. Daniel placed a hand on Rex's head, his touch firm but gentle. "We'll get it out," he murmured. The dog blinked slowly, a solemn acknowledgement. Emily leaned back, pulling off her gloves with a snap, her face tight with worry. "I'll prep what I can here. But this cabin isn't a surgical room. We need the clinic. We need it now." The fire popped in the silence that followed. Daniel straightened, his shoulders heavy beneath the sheriff's coat. Outside, the wind howled as though echoing the storm now brewing inside the cabin. Rex closed his eyes, but the look he had given lingered, sharp as a brand. A wounded soldier begging to be saved. And Daniel knew the fight for this dog's life had only just begun. The morning light hadn't yet broken through the storm. Snow still fell in heavy drifts outside the cabin windows, swirling like smoke in the cold air. Inside, the fire had dwindled to red embers. The warmth clung to the walls like the last breath of safety before the world outside reclaimed it. Daniel stood in silence near the front door, his eyes scanning the tree line through a crack in the wooden frame. Emily was still asleep in the chair next to Rex, who lay bundled beneath 2 layers of blankets, his breathing steady but shallow. The device they had removed, now locked in a steel case hidden beneath the floorboards, had changed everything. Whatever this was, it was big, and someone was going to come for it. That much Daniel knew in his bones. The cabin's generator sputtered, then died. The lights flickered and went dark. Emily stirred. "Power's out." Daniel nodded. "Just the generator, but it's not random." She rubbed her eyes and stood, brushing her sweater sleeves down over her wrists. Her auburn hair was a mess from the long night, and her eyes, usually warm and alert, carried the fog of little sleep. "You think they found us?" Daniel didn't answer. He bent to check the firearm holstered under his coat, then slipped a spare clip into his pocket. He turned to Emily. "We're leaving now." She blinked. "Rex isn't ready. We don't have time. We're not taking him to the clinic anymore, just somewhere safer. I know a place isolated. Signal dead zone." Emily looked down at Rex, who was watching Daniel now with quiet, knowing eyes. She knelt beside him and whispered, We're moving, boy. Hang in there. Rex gave a faint growl, not of fear, but readiness. The sound of a soldier acknowledging the next mission. 10 minutes later, Daniel had backed his patrol SUV up to the front door. Emily helped him gently load Rex onto the back seat, his body still weak, but head upright. She sat beside him while Daniel jumped into the front, starting the engine. Snow flew from the tires as they pulled away from the cabin, disappearing into the heavy morning storm. They didn't make it far. Just beyond the first bend in the road, hidden by snow-covered trees, a black SUV was parked sideways across the path, blocking their way. Its engine was still warm, exhaust pluming in the cold. Daniel brought the patrol vehicle to a slow crawl. 2 men emerged from the SUV. One was tall and broad-shouldered with a shaved head, dark goatee, and mirrored sunglasses despite the dim light. He wore a thick black tactical jacket, and his right hand rested loosely on the grip of a concealed weapon under his coat. The other was leaner, wiry with a twitchy posture, and long, greasy blonde hair tied in a loose ponytail. He wore a green bomber jacket and fingerless gloves, and he was grinning like a man who enjoyed breaking things. Daniel rolled the window down an inch. "Move your car." The bald man took a step forward. His voice was flat, practiced. "We're here for the dog. You're harboring something that doesn't belong to you." Emily sat still in the back, clutching Rex. The dog growled low, his lip curling just slightly. Daniel could feel the tension ripple in the air like static before a lightning strike. "I said, move your car," Daniel repeated. The blonde one smirked. "Or what? You going to shoot us?" Daniel didn't respond. Instead, in one swift motion, he pulled his pistol from the holster, aimed through the partially opened window, and fired a single round into the snow just inches from the bald man's boot. The man flinched. Rex barked, not weak this time, but sharp, protective. Daniel didn't wait. He slammed the SUV into reverse, spinning the wheel hard, snow spraying as the patrol vehicle lurched backward. The tires screamed against the icy surface as he tore down a narrow logging trail that veered off the main path, one he had used before on backcountry patrols. Behind them, the black SUV roared to life, tires spitting snow as it gave chase. Emily held Rex close, bracing him with her arms as the vehicle bounced and slid over the rough trail. "He's bleeding again," she whispered. Daniel gritted his teeth, eyes fixed on the mirror. The black SUV was gaining faster than he expected. He reached for the radio, only static. The trees here were too dense. The signal choked. They rounded a sharp curve, tires barely gripping, when Rex let out a growl and lifted his paw, resting it firmly against Daniel's shoulder. It was subtle, instinctive. But it stopped Daniel from overcorrecting the wheel on the ice. He studied just in time, avoiding a deadly skid. Emily stared. "Did he just warn you?" Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. Another bend, a sudden rise, then a frozen creek crossing ahead. Daniel made a split-second decision. He hit the brakes and turned sharply, veering off the trail and across the ice. The SUV bounced once, twice, then glided over the frozen creek just as the black SUV behind them overshot the bend and careened into a snowbank with a thundering crash of metal and pine. Daniel drove another half-mile before stopping in a clearing surrounded by trees. Steam rose from under the hood. The engine ticked. Silence returned, broken only by the rasp of breathing. Emily turned to him. "What now?" Daniel looked at Rex, who was watching him, eyes bright even through pain. "Now," he said quietly, "we find out why they want you so bad." The small-town veterinary clinic sat quietly on the edge of Bozeman, nestled behind a row of snow-dusted pine trees and shielded from the road by a chain-link fence. The old building had once been a fire station, now converted into a modest but well-equipped animal care center. Fluorescent lights flickered softly inside as the storm outside pressed against the windows. Daniel pulled into the back entrance just after sunrise. The patrol SUV coated in slush and streaks of mud from their desperate drive through the woods. He helped Emily out first, then carried Rex carefully through the side door. The dog was unconscious, breathing shallow but rhythmic, his wound freshly stitched but not yet fully secure. Every step had to be precise. Emily moved ahead, unlocking the surgical suite and flipping on the overhead lights. She was still wearing the same sweater and jeans from the night before. Her eyes bloodshot, hair pulled into a fraying bun that had long since given up trying to stay neat. There was no time for rest, no time for anything but this. Daniel laid Rex on the steel table, his own jacket still wrapped around the dog's torso. "He's stable," Emily said, glancing at the monitors. "Barely, but he's holding." The room was sterile and spare, a single steel operating table, glass cabinets lined with instruments, and a rolling cart of medical equipment she had organized herself. Emily scrubbed in silently, the kind of focused calm that comes only from repeated exposure to chaos. "Close the blinds," she said. Daniel did so without question, darkening the room. Outside, the snowfall had slowed, but the sky remained overcast, the light cold and gray. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and steel. Emily worked quickly, reopening the surgical site and preparing to examine Rex's abdomen again. The sedative was holding. There was no sound, but the gentle hum of machines and the occasional scrape of metal against tray. Daniel stepped back, crossing his arms. He watched closely, remembering a time years ago in Kandahar when a bomb-sniffing K9 named Bolo had saved his squad from a roadside trap. That dog had died in his arms. Rex reminded him of Bolo, not just in breed, but in spirit. That quiet bravery, that readiness to serve even when broken. Emily's voice broke through his thoughts. "There's something here behind the stomach lining. It's embedded deep." She reached for forceps, guiding them in slowly, carefully avoiding the organs. Her face tightened. Then, with a firm tug, she pulled out a small metallic capsule covered in scar tissue. It was cylindrical, silver, black, and no bigger than a cigar. Daniel moved closer as she placed it on the tray. He leaned in, squinting at the engraving near one end, a string of numbers, and below that, a barely visible military insignia. His blood ran cold. "That's an encrypted transit module," he muttered. "I've seen these used to move classified data in combat zones, usually hand-delivered by humans. But this," he looked at Rex. "They turned him into a carrier." Emily wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist. "So he wasn't just a dog. He was a soldier." Daniel nodded slowly. "A K9 unit, probably trained for military reconnaissance or explosives detection. But this?" He lifted the module with gloved hands. "This isn't standard. Someone repurposed him." Emily's voice dropped. "You think he was stolen?" "Worse," Daniel said. "He was kidnapped, hijacked from the military, and retrained to transport illegal weapons components or encrypted files across borders. If that module had made it to its destination, we'd never have known." Emily sat back, the exhaustion catching up with her. Why risk using a dog? Daniel looked at Rex, who remained unconscious, chest rising and falling. Because no one would suspect, no customs, no questions. Just a loyal K9 doing his job. Until something inside him told him to run. He placed the module in a sealed evidence bag, then pulled out his phone. No signal. They were still in a dead zone. He looked up. "I'm heading to my truck to check the radio. You okay here?" Emily nodded, already beginning to stitch up the wound. "I'll finish and monitor him, but be careful." Daniel stepped out through the side door into the cold. His boots crunched on gravel, the air crisp and heavy. The storm had passed, but the world still felt muted, watchful. Inside the SUV, the radio crackled faintly, barely catching a signal from the sheriff's department. He was just about to report when something made him stop. A shadow in the tree-line. Movement. Quick. Low. Daniel dropped the handset, hand reaching for his pistol, but the figure was gone. Back inside, Emily was wrapping gauze over the fresh stitches when Rex stirred. The dog whined faintly, one paw twitching, then his eyes opened. Dark, alert, tired, but aware. Emily leaned in. "Hey, it's okay, you're safe." Rex lifted his head slightly and turned it toward the door. A second later, it opened. Daniel stepped back in, gun in hand, expression tight. "I think they found us." Rex tried to get up. Emily pressed him down gently. "No, stay. You need rest," but Rex growled, his body still weak, but his instincts already ahead of them. He wasn't done running. The sky was ink black. The storm long passed, but leaving behind a ghostly stillness that draped over Bozeman like a warning. The snow around the clinic shimmered under the cold moonlight, untouched, flawless, until headlights sliced through the quiet, bouncing off the ice like a threat too loud to ignore. Daniel stood by the window of the small clinic's break room. The lights inside dimmed to keep the building low profile. He watched the road beyond the trees with narrowed eyes, jaw clenched, pistol in hand. Beside him, Emily sat cross-legged on a stool, watching the heart monitor attached to Rex's side. Her face was pale from lack of sleep, and her auburn hair was pulled into a loose braid now, falling over one shoulder. Despite her exhaustion, her posture was alert, ready, Rex lay on the padded surgical bed, groggy from the earlier operation. A clean line of stitches ran along his abdomen, wrapped carefully beneath gauze. His breathing was slow but even, his ears twitching with every unfamiliar sound. Then they all heard it, the crunch of tires on snow. Daniel moved fast, slipping into the hallway and signaling Emily with a finger pressed to his lips. She nodded silently and stood gently placing a hand on Rex's neck. He opened one eye and she whispered, "They're back." Outside, a black SUV rolled to a stop in front of the clinic's emergency entrance. The same vehicle they had seen before. Matte finish, no license plate, heavy tires built for snow and speed. The engine idled, humming like a threat beneath the hood. Two men stepped out. One of them was the same tall, bald man from earlier, broad frame, dark goatee, wearing a thick tactical coat, now dusted with frost. The other was new, slightly older, stockier, with a scar running across his temple and down past his cheekbone. He wore a black knit cap and moved with the deliberate confidence of someone who had broken into places like this before. The scarred man raised a hand, gesturing toward the back door. Daniel ducked back into the surgery room and reached for the emergency radio mounted near the cabinet. He pressed the call button. "Dispatch, this is Officer Daniel Smith at Northside Veterinary Clinic. Code red, armed intruders outside. Request immediate backup static." Then a voice, faint but clear. "Roger. Unit 42. Backup en route. ETA 10 minutes. Hold position." Daniel clicked off and looked at Emily. "Lock the back hallway. Get something to barricade the front door." Emily didn't argue. She moved quickly, dragging a rolling steel cabinet toward the front entrance. While Daniel killed the lights completely, darkness flooded the room, leaving only moonlight filtering in through the frosted windows. From the shadows, Rex let out a low growl. He wasn't strong enough to stand, but his instincts were sharp. He lifted his head, ears flattening against his skull, and bared his teeth toward the door. Daniel whispered, "Stay with him," then moved to the hallway with his pistol raised. Outside, the intruder circled the building. A soft tapping on the glass, then another. The bald man's voice rang out muffled through the wall. "We're nother for a fight. Just hand over the dog and nobody gets hurt." Daniel didn't answer. He crept to the front room and crouched near the door, breathing slow, listening. Then a crash. The side window shattered. Footsteps. Daniel fired. A single shot rang out, cracking through the hallway as glass exploded, and a boot slammed against the doorframe. One of the intruders grunted and ducked out of view. In the surgery room, Emily pulled Rex's stretcher closer to the inner wall and crouched beside him, one hand on his chest, the other clutching a scalpel. A second crash, the back door. Daniel rushed into the hallway as the door burst open and the scarred man charged in with a compact submachine gun raised. Daniel ducked behind the corner and fired again. Sparks flew as the bullet hit metal. The man cursed and fell back. "Still think this is just about a dog?" Daniel growled half to himself, half to whatever listening ears remained outside. Another growl answered from Rex. The dog pushed himself upright on shaking legs, blood seeping slowly from the fresh stitches. His teeth were bared, muscles trembling, but his posture was clear. He would not let anyone through that door. Emily tried to restrain him. "Rex, no." But he barked sharply and limped toward the hallway, standing just behind Daniel like a battered but unbroken sentinel. One more man tried the front entrance. The steel cabinet shuddered as someone slammed into it. Daniel stepped back, raised his weapon and shouted, "You've got 60 seconds to run before backup arrives. This place is locked, armed, and you're outnumbered." Silence. Then the engine roared outside. The SUV peeled away, tires spinning over Ison's now, vanishing down the road just as red and blue lights appeared in the distance, flashing through the trees. Daniel lowered his pistol, shoulders tight, breathing hard. Behind him, Rex let out a soft whine and slumped against the wall, eyes fluttering shut again. Emily rushed to him, catching his head before it hit the floor. "He's okay," she said quickly, checking his vitals. Weak but stable again. Daniel dropped beside her, running a hand through his hair. He bought his time. Rex let out one last low rumble, then curled his paw toward Daniel's boot, a quiet gesture full of trust. Flashing red and blue lights sliced through the night as 3 squad cars skidded into the veterinary clinic's snow-covered parking lot. Tires crunched over frost and boots hit the ground fast. Deputy Sheriff Mark Talbot, mid-40s, solidly built with a shaved head and permanent 5 shadow, led the charge. His movements were swift and economical, a man forged by 20 years off-field work and a long record of never hesitating when others did. He raised his rifle and signaled to fan out, perimeter. Now Daniel stepped out from the clinic's front door, one hand raised in greeting, the other gripping his sidearm. They came through the rear. 2 men armed, still close. Talbot gave a sharp nod. "We'll flush them." Inside the clinic, Emily stayed low beside Rex, who had been sedated once more, but was restless. The kind of restlessness that precedes chaos. His tail tapped faintly against the floor, and his ears twitched at every distant shout or footstep. Blood had seeped a little through the gauze on his abdomen, but his breathing held steady. Emily whispered softly, "They're here, Rex. Help is here." Suddenly, a flashbang grenade exploded near the side window, not from law enforcement, but from the attackers. Daniel cursed and dropped into a crouch as shards of glass sprayed across the lobby. Smoke filled the air. Another volley of suppressed gunfire rattled from the tree-line. These men weren't just desperate. They were trained. Daniel ducked behind the reception desk and shouted over the radio, "They're pushing forward. They're after the device." Across the lot, Deputy Talbot raised a hand. "Hold fire. We flank left. Keep eyes sharp." From the far end of the building, one of the intruders, the man with the facial scar, emerged from the shadows holding a smoke grenade, preparing to lob it through the rear clinic hallway. Rex stirred. Despite the pain, the dog pushed himself up on all fours, legs wobbling, teeth bared. He turned sharply toward the hallway door. Emily reached for him instinctively. Rex, no, but he was already moving. The sound of that smoke grenade's pin being pulled must have been enough to trigger something deep inside his instincts. Instincts that not even surgery and sedation could smother. Daniel caught the movement through the corner of his eye. Emily down. The scarred man came through the hallway doorway, just as Rex lunged forward, snarling like a thunderclap. His jaws clamped down hard on the attacker's forearm, the one holding the grenade. The man screamed, dropping the weapon as Rex dragged him off balance. They hit the floor hard. The grenade rolled unarmed across the linoleum before Daniel snatched it and shoved it into a metal waste bin. Two more officers stormed in behind him, rifles raised. "Freeze. Hands where we can see them." The man didn't resist. Blood poured from his arm where Rex's teeth had torn through fabric and skin. His face twisted in pain, but his mouth remained shut, clenched tight. Meanwhile, the second attacker, the baldman with the goatee, tried to circle around through the side entrance. But Deputy Talbot was waiting. One warning shot into the snow, and the man dropped his weapon. "Don't try it," Talbot barked. "You're not walking out of here." Daniel stood over Rex and the subdued attacker, breathing hard. "Get him cuffed," he said, then turned to Rex, who was now lying on his side, eyes glazed but conscious. Daniel knelt beside him. "You did it, soldier. You did it." Rex didn't move, but his tail thumped once against the floor. Back outside, the two intruders were dragged into separate patrol vehicles, wrists zip-tied, legs shaking more from rage than cold. Daniel approached Talbot at the squad car. "Did they talk?" Talbot shook his head. "Not yet, but we searched their SUV, military remaps, burner phones, encrypted comms, and one more thing, a dossier." He handed Daniel a folder, partially burned at the edges but still legible. Inside were photos of Rex, including one with a military handler in desert camo. The dog was younger in themage, eyes still fierce. Below that, a blurry photo of Daniel from a patrol last year. "Surveillance. They've been watching," Daniel muttered. Talbot lowered his voice. "They're hired muscle. The real threats, whoever sent them." Daniel flipped to the last page. There it was, a name scrolled in red ink across the top. Victor Lent. Daniel's blood turned cold. Lent was a whispered name in international weapons trafficking circles. A man too dangerous to be real, too invisible to be caught. But if these men worked for him, then everything suddenly made sense. Rex's abduction, the implant, the desperation. Emily came out of the clinic, arms folded tightly across her chest. She looked pale, lips pressed thin. "He'll live," she said, "but barely. The stitches tore and there's some internal bleeding. He needs real surgical care. A proper facility," Daniel nodded. "He'll get it." He looked down at Rex, now being gently lifted into the back of a police van on a stretcher. An oxygen mask had been placed over his snout. He was fighting. Still, Daniel leaned in close. "You're not going back into a cage, Rex. Not this time." The snow had begun to melt in Bozeman. The wind that once howled through the pines had softened into a hush, as if the land itself was exhaling after a long-held breath. Spring hadn't quite arrived, but the sting of winter was fading, leaving behind patches of thawed earth and the sound of birds returning to bare branches. Inside the sheriff's department, everything felt strangely calm, a kind of quiet only earned after the storm. Daniel stood at the front of the office, a stack of documents in one hand, his other resting gently on the leash of the German shepherd sitting patiently at his side. Rex looked better now. The wound along his abdomen had healed with impressive speed thanks to weeks of careful care, antibiotics, and rest. His fur had regained its shine, deep sable over charcoal, with a streak of silver above his brow. His eyes, however, held something deeper, wisdom, pain, and loyalty forged in fire. Across the desk sat Captain Julia Monroe, early 50s, sharply dressed in a pressed blue uniform with a silver insignia on her collar. She had short, gray-streaked hair, sharp blue eyes that rarely blinked, and a voice that had commanded respect in 3 counties. But there was kindness behind her stern presence, the kind only earned by years of leadership through storms. "I've reviewed the request, Daniel," she said, tapping the adoption papers. "You understand that given Rex's prior status as a military K9, this isn't just a pet adoption, it's a reinstatement. You'll be his official handler. He'll wear the badge again under your name." Daniel gave a quiet nod. "That's the idea." Monroe's gaze softened just slightly. "You sure you're ready for that?" Daniel looked down at Rex, who met his gaze unmoving. "I've never been more certain of anything." Monroe signed the final line and stood, extending her hand. "Then it's done. Officer Rex, officially retired from military service, now enlisted under the Bozeman Sheriff's Department as honorary K9 and companion." She stepped aside and opened a small box. Inside, on dark velvet, sat a custom-crafted K9 badge engraved with the department's crest and a single word beneath it. "Rex." Daniel took the badge and knelt beside the dog. He attached it gently to the newly fitted service harness Rex wore, not for work, but as a symbol of who he was. "You earned this," Daniel whispered. "Every bit of it." Rex blinked slowly and pressed his head against Daniel's chest just once. No barking, no dramatic show, just that simple wordless trust. Later that afternoon, Daniel pulled into the gravel driveway of the cabin, the same place where it had all started. The structure had been cleaned up in recent weeks, the windows repaired, the generator upgraded. Snow no longer covered the roof. Instead, flower bulbs had begun to sprout along the front porch. Waiting on the steps was Emily Carter, dressed in a light denim jacket and flannel shirt. Her cheeks were rosy from the wind, and her hair was down for the first time Daniel had seen soft auburn waves that danced around her shoulders. She looked relaxed in a way she hadn't during those long, tension-filled nights. She smiled as they approached. "So, is he officially yours now?" Daniel nodded. "Paper signed, badge pinned. He's home." Emily crouched and opened her arms as Rex padded toward her. He moved carefully, still favoring his left hind leg, but strong enough now to trot with purpose. He buried his head into her chest as she hugged him, murmuring, "Hey, soldier, welcome back." Inside the cabin, Daniel stirred a pot of coffee while Emily stacked firewood. The space felt different now. Not just a shelter, but a home. On the mantel above the fireplace, Daniel had placed a new frame. A photo of Rex from years ago in full military vest, standing beside a young soldier in desert fatigues. The man in the photo, Corporal Mike Trenton, had been Rex's original handler. Daniel had tracked the soldier's family down. Mike had been killed during a mission overseas. The family, in tears, had sent the photo and a letter they found in Mike's belongings, praising Rex as the smartest, most loyal partner I ever had. Daniel had read it aloud one night, and Rex had sat still the entire time. Now that chapter was closed, but a new one was beginning. As twilight fell, Emily brewed tea while Daniel watched the sun lower behind the trees. Rex lay curled by the fire, his breathing slow and steady. Emily leaned on the doorway beside Daniel. "You know, I thought after what happened I'd leave Bozeman." He glanced at her. "You're not." She smiled gently. "Not yet. I think there's more healing to be done here for all of us." Daniel nodded. She nudged him with her elbow. "And someone's got to keep this guy in line." Rex lifted his head briefly at the sound of her voice, thumped his tail twice, then laid back down with a sigh. Daniel looked out over the horizon where the sky burned orange and red behind the pines. There was no more gunfire, no more running, just quiet, just peace. And for the first time in a very long time, he let himself believe it might last. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or bright lights. They come quietly in the form of a wounded dog on a snowy cliff, a kind officer who chooses compassion, and the silent bond that grows between souls who have suffered but survived. Rex was once a tool for darkness, but through love he found a new purpose. Daniel was once a man haunted by war and loss, but through Rex he found healing. And together they built a new family, not because they were perfect, but because they refused to give up. Maybe you're going through something right now. Maybe you've been used, broken, or left behind like Rex once was. But just like him, you are not forgotten. There's a reason you're still breathing, still standing. Because God isn't finished with your story yet. If you believe in second chances, if you believe that every soul, even a wounded dog, deserves love and redemption, then share this story. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and if you believe that God still works miracles in silence, in snow, in scars, comment amen below, and may God bless you and your loved ones with peace, healing, and purpose. Let this story be a reminder. No matter how lost you feel, you are never truly alone.